Hello, everyone, and welcome to our LinkedIn Live. I'm very happy that we can do this today. And today we talk about my personal favorite topic, talk about market barriers, especially in relation to sustainable solutions within digital infrastructure. Um, if you think about it, we often, I think we all know some of these barriers, and we see a lot of interesting technology in the market, such as OCP or equipment from IT Renew or sustainable data centers in Norway. And there are still some barriers for them to be adopted in the market at scale. But if we never talk about these barriers, it will be difficult to overcome them. Um, I promised today that I will not be too controversial, but it will be my role as a moderator here from the SDA to make sure that we really get to the barriers, that we really get to the core of the issue, and that we get to talk about them. And I would like you, the audience, to really help me with this and also post in the chat, what do you think? Why are these solutions not being adopted in the wide market? What are some barriers? What are concerns? What are worries that people might have? And what you believe is stopping these solutions to be adopted in the market. So please use the chat. There is a slight delay between us seeing your comments and us getting them. So please bear that in mind and start posting already now. And step by step, I will pull your questions and your observations out, and we'll talk about them in this live session. So I'm very happy today. I have with me on this panel three wonderful guests, starting with Steve from the Open Compute Foundation in the United States. And yeah, I think everybody in the digital infrastructure world knows OCP. OCP is challenging the traditional server OEMs with an open source design for server hardware. It originally came out of the hyperscale community and is now really developing resource efficient and high performing server hardware in an open source way that anybody can implement. Um, Rob from Bulk is here with me, Rob Elder. Thank you for joining. Rob, also very well known in the data center industry, running a very sustainable data center in Norway, powered by 100% hydropower, which is of course renewable, but also from a building perspective, really innovating, taking an industrial area outside of Oslo and turning that into a sustainable digital infrastructure space. And more importantly, Rob already and his team is already addressing one of the key challenges in the Nordics, which is the latency argument with their own fiber network, which I personally find very impressive. It's very thought through, and very happy to have Rob here with me. And last but not least, Fahmi Bangert from IT Renew, head of sustainability. And yeah, very happy to have IT Renew here with us. Of course, also again, very well known with refurbished server equipment, really challenging the market and showing that also with refurbished servers, you can basically build very scalable, very high performing cloud infrastructure. And that you can, even as an enterprise, can use. You don't always have to buy new things, which I don't have to explain. Is probably the more sustainable way of looking at it. Good. With this, I would like to start, and I will give all my panelists the stage. And we want to start from a very positive perspective and thinking about a sustainable digital economy. I want to ask all of you, how does your company, how does your organization, how do your products contribute to the creation of a sustainable digital economy and to sustainable digital infrastructure? And we'll start with Rob. Stage is yours.
Thank you, Max. And good afternoon or good morning to those dialing in from elsewhere. But thanks for the introduction. So I guess from Bulk's perspective, we are an investor, developer, and operator of digital infrastructure, sustainable digital infrastructure, and not just data centers, but actually logistics, as well as fiber networks and data centers. So from our perspective, we are establishing a platform within the Nordic region. You mentioned obviously Norway, but we're also operating in Denmark, providing first of all the space, so the land, the power, and also the access to connectivity for unlocking, I suppose, the huge potential for truly green renewable data centers in the region. So our focus is very much on doing that at scale, and primarily is focused on unlocking the potential of the renewable energy from hydro within Norway, but also connecting that into key markets by building and investing in fiber network infrastructure, both subsea and terrestrial networks as well. So, and beyond that, we're working very hard to build the right relationships to bring more of an ecosystem to, I suppose, scale up and expand the opportunities for IT and digital infrastructure to actually go within our facility. So that's much more about collaborating and working with the likes of OCP and IT Renew, and obviously recently announced certification of our data centers for OCP as well. So yeah, that's very much how we believe we're adding to or contributing to this ecosystem for digital infrastructure.
Thank you, Rob. Really appreciate it. Nice overview. I hand it over to Famida. Yeah, how does IT Renew contribute to the creation of a sustainable digital economy?
Yeah, hi, good morning, everyone from California. Very nice to be here. Thank you for the invitation. So you nicely introduced us, Max. We are a one-of-a-kind company, and we've actually been thinking about circularity and sustainability 10 years before the term circularity caught on, so to speak, and really looked at the reverse business model and the closed loop supply chain. So as you said, we are in the business of decommissioning and then refurbishing for reuse. And because we follow the circular economy business model, we see the advantages to it. This is our way of contributing to global climate action, because in this way we are making our products from sustainably sourced materials, we like to call it, since it's reuse. We're extending the life cycle of the product from 2 years or 3 years to up to 10 years through reuse, and really keeping all the materials out of the waste stream, which is very, very important. So the circular economy business model essentially allows us, and of course this is through the lens of IT equipment, but what it allows us to do is look at zero waste, zero carbon at the same time. And we really think that this is one of the fastest way to get to global climate reduction. All of us know by now that the information technology industry by 2025 is going to be up anywhere between 8 to 10% of global carbon emissions. So anything we can do to reduce that is very, very substantive. And looking at the data center infrastructure and making sure that those equipments are being sustainably sourced and kept out of the loop is actually one of the primary solutions towards carbon reduction. It's all in the form of avoided carbon reduction, which is also an important note that we'll elaborate on. But yeah, IT Renew, it's a 20-year-old company, but about 10 years ago, we really caught on to this circular economy business model, and we process about 1 million servers a year, and working with the largest global hyperscaler companies to make it happen and be part of their carbon solution, as well as those with our secondary market. So happy to chat more. And once again, thank you. Great to be with you all.
Thank you, Famida. Much better introduction than mine, to be honest. But yeah, that's supposed to be that way. Steve, over to you. I think OCP also recently introduced the sustainability track, so I'm really looking forward to your introduction.
Yeah, Max. Welcome, everyone. I think that Famida and Rob exemplify the ethos of open compute, and that is to provide a community and a governance framework for people to work together and solve common problems. So open compute, as Max, you alluded to at the beginning, started 10 years ago. This is our 10th year anniversary. Started by Facebook, and it started around the server components, but it's certainly grown past that to where now we focus a lot on the data center and telco and other types of work streams, including sustainability. So there were a couple of examples. One is the several thousand engineers that we have participating across the 30 projects within Open Compute really do have a passion for simplicity. And it's one of the core tenets of Open Compute is efficiency, scale, openness, and impact. And when you combine all of those, there really is a simplicity to everything that comes through open compute, from the server designs to getting rid of waste to embodied energy. Those are the types of things that drive the entire community. It's even extended now past the hardware side into the software. So one of the key inhibitors of reuse in the past has been on the firmware side. So the open community has taken that as a particular project around open systems firmware and working on opening that up, then to allow people like IT Renew to more easily reuse that hardware into the secondary market. And then lastly is around the data center facility side. So one of the great things about this community is allowing the facilities to then engage more directly with the suppliers and the end customers to get an insight into what's needed and how to better optimize their facility and not over-engineer it. So one of the groups within Open Compute is the Data Center Facilities Group, which Rob works closely in. And it's about eliminating all of the things that you don't need in a data center and optimizing it for the new type of hardware. So around the community side, allowing a governance framework for people to solve problems collectively. And then those are just two examples around the firmware and the facilities guidelines that we've done to help drive the industry forward.
Perfect. Yeah, I think those are two very important topics. I know the topics around the server firmware. Always a challenge. Good to see that there's progress on that. Thank you all for the introductions. Now to the meat of this panel. And again, I just want to remind all the people in the audience, and I already see everybody introducing themselves. Nice to see you all coming. Thank you very much. And I want to remind you all, please post your perceived challenges. So you heard the introductions now from everyone. And I want you to think about, why are these things not being adopted at scale still in a lot of cases? Is there fears? Is there barriers? Is there concerns that you see in the market that you want to share with us that we can discuss here and address here? Because again, if we don't talk about the barriers, if we don't talk about the challenges, it's difficult to overcome them. Moving into that discussion, we will open this with our panel. So if you think about, take the example of OCP hardware, and I will ask Steve to have a short conversation with me. Why are not more people, so to say, using OCP hardware in their data centers? If they're more efficient, if they're simpler to deploy, if the facility becomes simplified, if they're easier to maintain. So in a way they're better, I want to say, and they're from that perspective also more sustainable since they're using less resources and less energy. Why do you think not everybody's already running on this on this hardware?
So I get this question a lot about people saying, well, I don't know anybody that runs it, or I haven't heard anybody else except for maybe some of the hyperscalers using the hardware. So Max, I look at this in a couple different ways. One is the external market of what is known and what is unknown. Looking back over the first 10 years of Open Compute, I would simply say that the first 4 years was a lot of marketing and a lot of awareness by Facebook driving what they're doing within the data center. And I would speak to a lot of companies out there, and they'd say, this is great, but I'm not Facebook. So I don't have thousands of engineers and I don't have my own data center. So that's not for me. And even if you get past that, over the last 3 to 5 years, if you sit down in front of an audience now, almost everyone knows what Open Compute is. But in the past, so let's say that I do know what Open Compute is, well, then where do I find it? Who sells it? Well, we had a very limited supply chain, and that supply chain itself was catering to the top 5 to 10 accounts in the world, and not necessarily focusing on those other industries that may be interested in doing a test evaluation piece. So that has changed dramatically over the last few years as well, as now we've broadened the supply chain for even local and regional providers. And then we have supply from people like IT Renew that then can supply that downstream channel and get hardware and components to end customers quickly, trying to drive that next wave of infrastructure. And you also see some of the maturity of the market. So in the past, I would say that an enterprise had one option. If I would either go with a traditional OEM or I go public cloud. So a lot of people would just defer to public cloud because they had very limited resources. But now with some of the economics behind some of the growth on some of these sectors, it makes sense to put a pencil to paper and say, well, can I run things cheaper on my own infrastructure with this type of hardware moving forward? So I would say it's a combination of, hey, I didn't know about it. It sounds good, but who sells it and who supports it? And lastly, if I do this, I don't have it. Who's going to help me? And do I retrain my own guys? Do I take them off of AWS? Do I do my own thing? I talked to one particular company, Max, that said they have 5 engineers. And they said, what do I do with these 5 engineers? Do I tell them to go learn a new technology? Do I put them on AWS and then just get going? So there is some resource constraints happening at the enterprise level. So all of these things are happening within market that causes delays or hindrances or fear of moving to something new and different.
Yeah, I very much agree with that. Do you think, just a last question on that, do you think that in the future we will see traditional OEMs such as HP or Dell actually sell us OCP kit, because that could also be a solution to that challenge?
It is. We've seen, and you can tell, one of the that's a very good indicator, as I'd mentioned, there's the external and then there's the internal. So there's a lot of companies out there using different components of open compute that you would never know about it. So some of the largest OEMs in the world use a piece of open compute, maybe it's the network interface card, on their traditional OEM servers. So people are using, and some of the biggest name brand switches are being made by OCP type of vendors. So that's the hidden market or the underlying market that is out there that is proliferating, that the normal external customer may not realize just how big and sizable this market is. When you do have customers that raise their hand and say, I want this stuff, then you quickly see the OEMs start to offer open type of solutions or start to become more engaged within the community. And you can quickly take a look at membership directories across open organizations, not just OCP, but RISC-V, ONF, TIP, and you can quickly see the vendors start to pop up because these large customers are starting to ask for this type of technology. So I certainly see, and in the past, HP has had OCP hardware, and I'm sure they'll have more in the future, as well as the other OEMs.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's the point that you made. I think it's the beauty about organizations like the Open Compute Foundation is that ultimately everybody can implement it, and if you believe in it, and if you want to produce it yourself in your traditional OEM business, you can, and there's nobody stopping you from it. And I think that's how we move forward as an industry. I think that's great to see.
Yeah, and I do really think that people are becoming much more comfortable buying an unbranded piece of hardware now with the software. The software is another big change that's happened in the last 5 years. So prior to that, I was running a lot of legacy proprietary software. Now with all the cloud containerized type of applications, you can disaggregate, and it changes the underlying infrastructure needs to where now this becomes even more feasible. So those are other factors that, as the market matures, more opportunity develops.
Yep, I liked it a lot. I want to quickly comment on something that Sophia Flocker posted in the comments. The lack of awareness of non-energy sustainability issues, and I know that I think Famida will also have something to say about that in a minute. From the SDA's perspective, right? So awareness and data are two things that we talk about a lot, right? There's a lot of data that is not available. For example, the embedded emissions of server hardware, standardized models for life cycle, and so to say, all the other things that are within the value chain of digital infrastructure that are not just electrons, that are not just power. And I really like that Sophia is commenting on this, because it is hard to measure at the moment. And it's also hard to take that into account in a business case, right? If I buy refurbished hardware, I have less embedded emissions in that hardware. But there is no standardized way to measure that, to compare that. There's no data available on that. And I think as the SDA, I hope with our data hub that we recently announced, we can provide some of that transparency and some of that data that can compare. So taking down that market barrier of lack of data is something that we are very keen on moving forward. But maybe Famida, also you want to comment on this real quick, because it's a nice comment, I think.
Yeah. Thank you, Sophia. And so, yeah, the barriers. Steve started us off on this one, and I'll elaborate on 3 points. Information. I look at information a little bit more broadly, and being a sustainability practitioner for so long, there is truly almost always, when it comes to climate action, some sort of a dissociation with reality. Things could be happening right in front of us, but we don't quite see what our action is to do. So the same for IT infrastructure. Whether people know it or not, some of the stats I shared in the very beginning, if people knew that IT will be 8 to 10% of global emissions, if people knew that the e-waste problem on the other side of the coin is only growing over time. If people knew that the hyperscalers will be decommissioning more hardware in the next few years than the top 5 OEMs combined, all that information is actually out there. But packaging that and relating to what we could do about it as an industry, that's another matter, right? So this is sort of like a generic psychological barrier that exists when it comes to environmental action, and I think we can all relate to that. More specifically, this accounting barrier. So yeah, you're right. The GHG protocols that exist today, they themselves are still built on the linear economy model, on the take, make, waste. So the way the accounting is done for scope 1, 2, and 3, they don't necessarily have provision for avoided emissions. What if you avoid? What kind of credits do you get? What kind of incentives do industry have to buy reused products? It just doesn't really show up in the accounting mechanism. So it's the protocol needs to evolve. And there are examples like ourselves or others in the industry that are actually leading and making sure that the example is available in advance. So there's hope here, but currently not having the full accounting mechanism of circularity relating to carbon credits is definitely a void, and therefore some sort of a barrier. The other one that, and maybe others would get into a little bit, is there is a stigmatization around reuse. Yeah, even if the refurbished product is just as good, in some cases better, it can be deployed 4 to 6 times faster, half the cost, and in many cases 1/4 the carbon. Even then, there can be propensity to buy the brand label for the satisfaction of something being brand new, made just for them, and association with the brand. So it does show up in our industry a lot, and you wanted us to focus on the barriers. I'll stop here, but I will end on the good news towards the end, that those perception, information, and accounting barriers are also starting to dissolve very, very quickly with the kind of example and the success we have out there. So, but it's good to acknowledge the barriers. I agree.
Yeah, thank you, Famida. Great points. And I think, again, as more data becomes available, I think we can address a lot of the transparency and measuring topics, and make this just the data more available, information more available. I want to give it to the word to Rob. Rob has access to unlimited green electrons, if I'm not mistaken, and amazing connectivity. So I wonder, Rob, what is stopping people at the moment, in your opinion, to basically relocate very electrically intensive workloads such as HPC or also more standardized cloud workloads to Norway? What do you think are the barriers?
Well, we have access to unlimited electrons, renewable electrons. That's a very interesting comment, I suppose. It depends if they've already been bought by everybody else in Europe, but maybe that's part of the issue. I mean, you can look at it a few ways, I suppose. I mean, clearly the wider dynamic in the marketplace is, many enterprise customers, end users, whatever, that we speak to are cloud first on everything. So I guess, the customer base for the traditional co-location data center is changing. We know that. And those customers are buying cloud services from, the same group that we also know, who themselves have developed some of the largest data centers in Europe, in the Nordics. So actually, the Nordics is booming from a data center perspective. the slight shift in dynamics clearly is those larger hyperscalers are building their own facilities. So for businesses like Bulk, we can approach that in a number of ways, as a more real estate based business or more as a data center based business. So I suppose the pool of customers adopting and deploying their own hardware is changing, but we're seeing, I suppose, more customers who are starting to challenge some of those hyperscalers looking at the Nordics for two reasons, really. One is because they see there's scale, both today and future scale growth, and secondly, because the price is very attractive. So, not only does it afford you direct connection to renewable energy, but you have a lower price. I think the challenge is that the norm, and to some extent, the comment was made in relation to buying secondhand, reused, repurposed hardware, is the norm is kind of a steady place to be. It's an acceptable low risk strategy. So I think there's a combination of the fact that clearly the mature markets in Europe have a huge ecosystem and a legacy of interconnected providers of different parts of the value chain, which support that whole ecosystem within those markets. But secondly, that's where the customers are based, and that is where they continue to want to be near and proximate to their IT. I think it takes a slight mind shift to start considering what applications, what IT, how can I re-architect my systems to enable me to access the benefits of moving to the Nordics. So I think that argument is still to be tackled to some extent. It's very easy to buy green energy. So if the pure ambition is to say that we consume and have green energy, then if your provider can provide you with the relevant certificates, then you can achieve that very easily. So it's perhaps a slightly more principled discussion, but we do see, I say, those customers who are looking at more kind of flexible, lower cost solutions for outsourcing their IT to different SaaS providers, different platform providers who I suppose are challenging some of the established hyperscalers in what they deliver, moving to the Nordics. And so outside of the, I suppose, established, well-known, some of the automotive companies have stood up their own platforms. More service providers are looking at this market. The other thing to bear in mind as well is some enterprise customers we talk to, very much want to sign an outsourced kind of fully managed solution from a provider, and therefore they lose some control over where that goes. So not only is data a bit of a problem in terms of understanding what data to capture and how does it translate into meaningful information for a customer, actually when you start to introduce service providers and layers of service providers, you really lose track of how location can make a difference. So yeah, there's a number of challenges. I think there is also high performance computing, AI, machine learning, where big users of HPC are very science driven, and there is still this, depending on how these projects are funded and depending on how the science is performed, there is a real server hugger mentality about it, and a little bit of a nationalistic approach to, it's got to stay in our geography and in our borders. And there's a number of different initiatives happening at the moment which sound like that. So I don't know. There's still work to be done in getting that message across, I think. But we're certainly seeing an uptick in, I'd say, tier 2 type platform businesses and software providers that are trying to unlock probably a price advantage by being in the Nordics primarily.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So there's a theme that I hear here that actually the business case is probably not so much the problem, because if I take what Steve said, OCP hardware is generally more energy efficient, uses less components, and is probably more resource friendly. So there's probably also cheaper, I would translate into that in traditional economics. I think Famida also made the point, and Rob also made the point. So I think it sounds a lot like there's maybe a perception problem or an uncomfortable change that needs to happen, and maybe a business architecture challenge to a certain extent, which I find very interesting. I would like to bring one question to Steve, if I find it again. There's a lot of questions coming in. If I can, yeah. How do you see it came from Astrid, actually. Astrid Rogers at TechBuyer. she commented on the Moore's law effect, and since OCP is very close to that, and that's also some in a way related to refurbished hardware. Steve, how do you see that? Do you think that has soft server development slowed down in terms of upgrading the hardware all the time, or how do you see that? Is performance stabilizing? How do you feel about this? I can't hear you.
I don't think performance is stabilizing. It's certainly increasing, and the density per rack is increasing as well. I think with the new groups that are working, for example, the chiplets with the open domain system architectures, which I'm not technical enough to get into, but that chiplet and some of the accelerator infrastructure that's happening within the group is going to continue to accelerate the performance. And I know that we're running up on Moore's law, but I'm still quite bullish on the overall price performance moving forward. I don't know what Famida's and Rob's perspective is on that.
It's a very technical question. I was just curious. That's more also my personal curiosity, to be fair. I think I agree with you, Steve. I think there will be other chip designs that will accelerate this forward. But I would like for us to jump in a little bit more into the questions from our audience or the concerns from our audience. I think there was in the beginning a lot of comments also from Chris Adams, who asked, how do we actually measure, so to say, end to end the carbon footprint of software? So when Famida deploys a refurbished rack in Rob's data center, how does that affect the carbon footprint of the software that runs on top? And I'm looking at all of you. Feel free to jump in if you want to, if you have an idea on how we could make that work.
I can begin, and then I invite Rob and others to. So scope 3, everything we're talking about in terms of carbon, other than renewable energy, that's all part of scope 3. Yeah. So Rob's world is directly addressing scope 1 and 2 because of the co-location, and all the embedded energy in the IT hardware, software. It's all scope 3. Having gone through scope 3 calculations. For the company or some of the assets, it's not super straightforward. And I guess my simple answer is you really have to isolate components. Software, the hardware component of it is usually weight-based or, energy use-based, or in many cases, spend-based. And then the software, if the software is running off of the energy, then you want to focus on sort of the energy use of that. But it's, the trick with scope 3 is always looking at the life cycle of it and finishing, make sure that it kind of rounds up from the control to the experiment, so to speak. But there's no one sure way to separate that. But software and hardware you can separate from kind of weight-based versus the non-weight-based parts of the scope 3. So that's my way of looking at that, if anybody wants to get into that. If it's more overall general life cycle assessment, IT Renew did a very good paper back in 2019 that looked at the total cost of ownership of equipment, which was also a weight-based method, and really being able to show the strong business case behind refurbished equipment. So I encourage everybody to take a look at that. I assume half of the audience who've logged in today have actually seen it, and if you haven't, that would be the place to start. It has both the LCA-based method as well as the outcome, the business case, and the total cost of ownership for a refurbished product.
Thank you, Famida. I think that was a very, very nice answer.
And also, just to comment on that, though, it also has to do with the facility, though, right? It's not just the hardware itself. If you're going to start doing measuring and tracking, it's got to be like for like, whether you have your own data center or you're in a colo, has some impact on that as well, and how you measure.
I agree. I did this good question also to Rob. Rob, if software were to have a carbon footprint, do you think that would drive more workload, so to say, into other areas?
I think the first part of that is to try and make a common a common approach to, the data. I mean, the GHG protocols kind of exist and are clear. We're in the process of setting our own carbon budget and putting an action plan in place, and plan very, in the kind of same theme as Steve was saying about being very transparent about that. But at the moment, that transparency is very hard to see. So, there's not just the practical side of doing it. There's also the commercial side of doing it. And I think absolutely it would. We're planning to, promote and publish information about how we perform in these areas, but it is quite difficult, and it is very complex. So, I mean, to Sophia's point earlier, outside of the energy piece, clearly there's a method to it, but even the energy piece is quite challenging. Purely making a commercial decision on your purchasing of energy makes a difference to how you report the carbon intensity of that part of your emissions. So I guess it goes beyond. You've got to understand, even if you could present a consistent, clear data format, you've got to then understand what does that mean, and what does that translate into from a customer, whether it be availability or whether it be redundancy or whatever, because I think those things are still very marketing. There's a lot of marketing spin on a lot of these things rather than real tangible, meaningful information, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. I think there's also still a lot of definition problems just on green energy, and then life cycle assessments are something that a lot of people are talking about, where we're not seeing a lot of them. I'm gonna put Steve on the spot. I apologize, Steve.
It's okay.
Is there any intent from the OCP community to provide life cycle models for OCP kit in the near future?
Yeah, I'm going to let Famida comment on this as well. We have started a new initiative under sustainability, of which Famida is leading. Within the sustainability group, we have a fantastic group already starting to work on LCAs, and maybe you'd like to share a little bit of status on where that work stream is right now.
Yeah, that's super kind of you, Steve. So OCP has all these robust work streams, and this year we kicked off sustainability and circularity. And obviously, two terms that come up right away with it is life cycle cost assessment or life cycle assessment methodology, and then metrics. So what we are looking into as a group and consortium of companies who are OCP members is really to do the frameworking first. Looking at through the lens of an equipment, an OCP equipment, what would be the phases? So first, the most important thing, and this is actually one of my concluding comments, but I'll share it now. We have to design without waste in mind at the beginning. In the beginning, when we're designing things, that's really where the majority of the impact happens. So going back to that, with OCP, we're looking at the 5 key phases, and it coincides with the circularity model. So you design waste out, then you're looking at sort of the materials selection, what would go into it. And so that also plays a role down the road in the scope 3 calculation for embedded emission. Then the manufacturing process, how efficient the process can be. Can there be closed loop solutions within manufacturing? Then there's use phase of the product. And then the most important, which is the end of first life. Notice I didn't say end of life, but end of first life, and then reuse. So when all that's looped in together, we're working on providing a fairly generic framework, but with enough guidelines and enough metrics so all the OCP members can follow. And LCA is essential to that calculation. If somebody like Adam wants to follow through and do the LCA around it, it would naturally work out. But we also want to talk about kind of the marketing and the communication around it. I see one other comment is that it's super important to really socialize this and not have such a big distance between the equipment is over there, but we're over here, but rather we are in the circularity movement together, because that's what keeps the carbon out. That's what keeps the waste out. So OCP Summit's actually coming up in November. If any of you are interested, please do submit proposals. So I would love, I just put in the plug over there. So Steve, back to you.
No, that's fine. I just find it, this is a good example, Max, of when the group collectively says, all right, well, let's see, we all have a common problem. Let's get together and see if we can do something about it. And when this work stream is formed, these were fascinating early discussions when you get these type of companies on the same call and everyone sharing their perspective and what their definition of sustainability is, and then to try to narrow that down into something tangible that they can deliver. It's been a fascinating few months to watch these discussions materialize into actionable items. And thank goodness we have somebody like Famida to help corral this and make it go the right direction.
Yeah, I'm very happy to hear this from you guys, and I'm also happy. I know from Rob's organization that they're also very much working on defining the emissions in the building, the emissions in the power system, and in the actual data center. And if I think about it, right, that if there is an LCA model for OCP equipment or for IT Renew, and then there's data available from bulk, for example, then for the first time we can actually put together a digital carbon footprint, at least all the way to the server layer, and provide software with real information on how much resources and emissions are potentially in the usage of that software. And I'm really looking forward to that. There's an amazing audience, by the way, I have to say. Thank you everyone for the discussion, the questions. Sophia asked the mother of all questions when it comes to behavior change. What influences can change behavior? What incentives can influence the behavior of people? And I want to give Rob the opportunity to answer first if you have any ideas. Completely open, and I'll hand it to the rest of the group. But I think this is a good question, how to change market behavior.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Very, very good question. I think there was a question about generators and stuff earlier as well. So interestingly, we're a service provider to our customers. So how do we change our behavior? We respond to what our customers ask us for at the end of the day. So we're there ultimately to serve our customers. And it's a constant challenge. So we very much want to move quickly to a more sustainable solution for our customers. And we're very keen to talk about opportunities for removing certain elements of the backup infrastructure, generators and stuff, for example. And the specifications and the SLAs that we're asked to sign up to make it very difficult for us to innovate and change the core fundamental principles of what we're delivering as a data center infrastructure. So, to some extent there, we try and influence and educate our customers, and but it's a bit of a give and take in that example, because, if we're being prepared to ask to take up a certain element of risk, and there's a financial impact to not delivering, then you have to take a decision as a business, and that might be a very different decision than what's right for a sustainable solution, let's say. But even in Norway, we see the electrification of many sectors, and I think that's going to put a huge demand on, okay, there's a surplus today, or a big surplus of renewable energy, but with the current power interconnectors, with the current increase in electrification in other sectors, certainly in regions of Norway, there is a shortage of available power. At certain times a day, there is an issue on capacity. So we're already seeing legislation in the country and in region to try to manage demand, and you start to see taxes on certain sectors or certain types of day to flatten out demand. So I do think you will see this, but again, I think you have to encourage companies, and I saw obviously the European Union announced, that they're very keen to continue to pursue this next 10-year strategy for reducing carbon. That's going to come with some measures that people have to do, and I think it's going to have to be a combination of two things. We try to encourage our customers. We do a lot of innovation in the Nordics because I think there's a huge natural assumption that power is green because most of it is in the Nordics. There's a lot of innovation in other areas where looking at different ways to construct, design, operate, build data centers, which you don't see necessarily in other areas. So I think it's inevitably going to be a combination of all of the above, but somebody's got to pay for things if it requires R&D, it requires additional investment, and it's a question of whether customers are prepared to pay that price, because at the moment all of the discussions we have is about value for money, and actually when it comes to sustainability, I don't see people paying a premium at the moment.
I noticed one of the Jules in the chat here, he just said fear. Fear is a good way to get people to change. And I agree. I mean, I think the fear of watching your competitor come out with a great sustainability story or them saving this or doing that, there'll be this component. It's certainly not going to come from the vendor side. It's going to be, has to be customer driven. It's very evident when a customer decides to do something, the hands that raise up to say, yeah, I can help you, are quite evident in the open hardware business. People that have never done open hardware in their life, if a customer wants it, they now want to start selling it. So it's going to come from the customer side. There's going to be fear. The legislation helps. I'm not as bullish on regulations impact short term as maybe some other people. I think the regulation's interesting, but I don't see it translating onto regular enterprise very quickly and as a particular buying behavior. And I still think that overall people have a trouble connecting the dots between sustainability and cost performance. So they think it's an either or. And instead of looking at the IT renew model, when you have, I can get both, they're still not making that connection in a lot of areas. They're saying, I'm going to either buy on this or I'm going to buy on this particular benefit.
But Steve, do you think as well? I mean, it's actually not just one thing; it's combining that with the right location and the right. So that's a perfect example where trying to bring different elements of that ecosystem together to deliver a combined benefit is where perhaps that it requires a different thought process because those decisions are made quite often in silos.
I agree.
Yeah, collaboration across the value chain, is necessary. Data is necessary. Information is necessary, and I think you're right that when you look at the fully integrated business case of many sustainable solutions, all of you are correct that the business case is actually better, and we've seen this over and over and over again. So I think people need to realize that, and people need to be empowered to make that happen. I'm also not so bullish, Steve, like you said, on the just the stick. I think it also has to be positive change to a certain extent. People have to want to make it more sustainable. So looking at the time, I would like to give all of you the opportunity to end on a positive note, which to give full credit where credit is due was Famida's idea. So you get to start. So closing this panel, I by the way, I have to say, amazing audience. I love the discussion that's going on. I wish we could cover more questions, and I think a lot of us will stay in the chat afterwards and try to cover some of these points. And also feel free to reach out to any of us to get those answered. Really, we are all here to speak with you and to answer any market barriers and concerns. But now over to Famida with some, maybe your reflection on this panel, your reflection on sustainability and the positive perspective, the positive outlook.
Yeah, no, thank you. So let me answer this with a question that was on the chat too, saying defining sustainability, and I'll share my definition of sustainability and why that is the ultimate positive answer. I think we've seen throughout this panel that while there are barriers, there are also solutions. There are the couple solutions that come with the barriers, because every barrier is an opportunity, right? And we are starting to see the trend shift. The stigmatization is falling away as good examples like ours come up. It's very cost competitive, so it makes total sense to have reusability as a very solid business model towards sustainability solution. And also, really, organizations are starting to come together. The camaraderie you see here is genuine, and we always talk with each other and working all the time. Sustainability definition, it started with the United Nations definition of meeting the needs of today without compromising the needs of the future. And that is actually still the definition, and then something that we always look up to. What's really been added in the last few years is that what are some of the ways to get there faster, because we are running out of time. 2021 to 2030 is the decade of climate action. We have to align ourselves. We actually kind of have no choice. So circularity is definitely very important, and it's a beacon of hope, I believe. A lot of the companies, if we can really evolve into our circularity model, a lot of these barriers will solve itself. We see it within our company and our own carbon footprint, how we are able to add value to supply chain, and really being able to design waste out from the beginning. Super, super important, not just for IT hardware, but for everything, for every business. Leave the waste out, and things will fall in itself. So I end with an Einstein quote that came to me as we were talking, as how we can work together. And I think a lot of us have seen it. Leading by example is not one of the many means, but the only means to really success, towards success. So I again, thanks for inviting us to this panel, and I'll give others the chance to close it up as well.
Yes, I would give it to Rob, but yeah, the bar is high. That was a great quote.
I haven't time to find my quote book down here, so I was caught on the hop with that one. I think just building on with that, designing without waste in mind. I think actually as we move forward, designing with flexibility and scalability in mind, sometimes the perception is you kind of waste in doing that. I think actually the challenge is doing that without waste, and I think the Nordics, I think, and particularly Norway, we have to win this kind of, I suppose, this argument, move it forward for other reasons than sustainability. We have to, the byproduct of moving workloads to the Nordics is, well, actually it's much more sustainable. But I think we have to believe that we can deliver a longer term strategy which is more aligned to business, which is at scale. We have a huge amount of land available, of power available. We have capacity and infrastructure for fiber network. So building that long-term infrastructure platform actually means that you can deliver hopefully more for your business, more flexibly and at lower cost, because so I think we're building the ecosystems and the services that support that longer term view, and obviously the byproduct of that and a key part of that is sustainability. But I think we don't plan to grow our business purely on the basis of attracting people to the Nordics for sustainability, because the value creation, the value opportunity is more than that. I think that's the big macro shift in the sector. But yeah, from our point of view, and I'm hugely confident that we're doing that. We're seeing some really interesting companies now talking to us about building platforms and adding services to our existing facilities, because they see this shift. And it's not just shift north; it's also shift west, where big transatlantic and big sea cables are connecting into mainland Europe. So sort of providing a platform and a gateway for those services is going to be key. So we're working across, I suppose, all of those different elements of that ecosystem with sustainability at our core to change that shift. But it's not going to happen overnight. But we're hugely confident and optimistic and very positive about it. So yeah, and leading by example. So I haven't done many flights out to Norway recently. That's my contribution. But
nice, thank you, Rob. That was a nice perspective on the question. Steve, what about you? Closing words.
Yeah, I'll close it. Never been more excited. Never been more positive about the idea of open hardware, open ecosystems, open everything working together faster. This is a great example. We've never had more data center facility operators working in a hardware community like this, with the vendors, with the suppliers, with the end customers. So it just shows you the breadth of a community. So I'm a big fan of open source. I think that communities move fast. I think that end customers are going to be smart enough to know that to get with community-based engineering makes sense. And more people are asking about open technologies today than they were last week, than they were a year ago. So I remain bullish. And I do know that on the circular economy side, it is the way forward for many organizations to do this, and in an optimized facility.
Thank you, Steve.
Yep.
Yeah, I also share your belief in open source and open community. So nice to hear that. Yeah, from the SDA side, I will also close it up. I'm just very thankful that we were allowed to bring you all together in this panel. Thank you very much for attending.
Yeah.
It's very important for us to address these barriers to our roadmap to create a sustainable digital economy. And I promise you, we will not go to sleep. We will not rest until those barriers are down, and we can really realize, a carbon neutral, a sustainable digital economy. And for John Laban, my definition of sustainability is balancing environment, economics, and society. So a holistic picture. of something that is future proof that my kids can use. That's what we're all working on to a certain extent. Very nice. Thank you all. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to the audience. You were amazing. I will go into the comments now and respond to every single one of them. And yeah, thank you all for participating. Thank you for joining. It was wonderful. Cheers.
Yeah, thank you,
Thank
Max.
you all. Yeah,
Thanks,
thank you.
Steve,
Max.
Rob.
Thanks
Good
all.
to see you.
Thanks, Rob.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Are we logging off? Yeah.